Hi, I'm Jeff Bailey. Thank you so much for joining me here. This is a workshop on Avita Yoga for osteoporosis, and we're going through 12 shapes in this practice here, this workshop that has been proven to improve bone density. We cover those 12 shapes, but we also really use it as a segue into the Avita Yoga practice, which for years now has been all about increasing bone density, bone strength, joint mobility, and joint health and strength. The fact is, everything in your body, whether it's soft tissue, cartilage, or bone, thrive with healing pressure. Avita Yoga is not about stretching. It's about releasing, finding our way into the bones and in and around the joints to bring more freedom and simultaneously increase bone density to help stave away osteoporosis. Thank you all for being here. You discovered these 12 poses from Dr. Fishman, who he's a medical doctor and a yogi. He's one of those guys that I think probably in the 70s was studying with Mr. Iyengar in India. And it just took him by storm. And his story goes, he was studying with Mr. Iyengar for a while there and getting ready to come back to the US and held a little party for everybody, a little gathering, good farewell, goodbye. And he noticed how strong Mr. Iyengar's bones were. And he saw his bones, kind of had this vision of how glistening and shiny his bones were. And that inspired him to begin this lifetime of research that he's done about bone health when it comes to yoga. And I took his workshop many years ago. I was inspired by that too. It inspired the yoga, it inspires me because I like to go deep with whatever I do. And what could be deeper than our bones? So in the teacher training and a lot of times just when I'm teaching, I'll say things like, we're using our muscles to get to the bones. So that's a little bit of the backdrop. Thank you, Linda. In the private session, we went over some of the shapes. Well, we went over all 12 of the shapes. And just in a moment, I thought, okay, if we can pull this off, let's do a workshop. And it's going to be especially good because while Dr. Fishman did these 12 shapes, some of them are very complex. They're not easily attained. And so, for everybody that is. And so I want to find a way, I'm going to teach you all how to do these 12 shapes and make them doable. Because if the yoga is not doable, if you can't find a sense of peace in the moment, in the yoga, then there's a struggle and there's a fight. And if we can be in the shape and do our yoga and attain a peaceful sense of self, then the benefits are multiplied. They're compounded infinitely, I think. With peace of mind, everything gets better. And that's what yoga is all about. For thousands and thousands of years, it's always been about the mind. And only recently, we turned it into this physical thing. And I think it's beautiful that we can do something physical that helps inspire peace of mind and health in our bodies and bones. How many of you are here because you know you have osteoporosis? All right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Ultimately, we want to accomplish two things. We want to make our bones stronger. We want to make them stronger. We want to make the joints stronger. And we want to increase our mobility. Because what's the number one concern with osteoporosis? We're concerned we're going to fall and break a bone. Right? Am I missing anything? I mean, that's the essence.
No, you are missing it, so. One of the main reasons that people end up in nursing homes is because they've broken their hip, and then that's the slide down.
It is the slide down. Once you break a hip, and it's the most vulnerable part of the hip or the femur is the neck of the femur, where it transitions into the head of the humerus. So that's the vulnerable place. That's almost always the place that gets broken.
And it increases fatality risks too.
Yep.
After a hip fracture.
Yep.
Increases fatality risk. Okay, yeah, everything goes downhill, especially at that age when you break a bone, but especially a hip. Okay. So now for years I've been teaching this yoga, not doing these 12 shapes so much, but bringing this idea of densifying and increasing bone strength into every shape that we do. So I want to take a quick look at my notes here and be sure I'm covering everything here to get started. I have a definition of exercise. It's a really simple definition of exercise. That which is challenged gets stronger. It's really simple. And if you just play with that idea, that which is challenged gets stronger, it also can help you keep from over-exercising, because there is a difference between fitness and health. Especially living here in Boulder, Colorado, we can go out on any given day and see lots of really, really fit people, but then sometimes you wonder how healthy they really are. So we're going to just play with that idea a little bit. Well, I can say personally, I will take health over fitness any day of the week, knowing that there's a difference. So if exercise presents a challenge that makes things stronger, and we want stronger, healthier bones, we got to get to the bones. What tends to happen when we find out we have this condition called osteoporosis, or the more entry-level condition called osteopenia, fear sets in. It's a little bit like going to the doctor and finding out you have degenerative arthritis in a hip or a knee, and the moment we find out about that, oftentimes we just want it out. And we live in an age where we can just cut it out. We can cut it out and we can replace it with something else. And why I'm saying that is because I want to just talk to the fear. When the fear comes up like that, what we tend to do is give all of our healing power away. There's an authority figure. There's all the evidence. We get this image of what's going on inside of us, and it initiates this fear response. And what I'm saying is, anytime you go for these tests, you go for an MRI for a joint issue, you go to the doctor for this or that reason, consider it information. It's just pure information. And retain your healing power. You stay in your center. And when you want to give it away or the fear comes in, there's the yoga, right? And that brings it back to this spiritual practice, really. Peace is my number one goal. So balance, what I've found in yoga for many, many years now, yoga's been a part of my life for over 35 years. And what I noticed initially, whenever people would do balancing poses, there was always this challenge, and you try to get better at the balance. And what you end up doing is wobbling, and there's all these attempts to balance. But we're always going to have a hard time balancing if the mobility isn't there. To just simply lift one foot up and stand on one foot requires all kinds of mobility in the ankle and the toes, even through the knee and up into the hip. Without that, it makes it really hard to balance. So I feel, right along with strong bones, we need to maintain our mobility. Mobility is different than flexibility. Right? With flexibility, just think of Gumby, just flexible. I can do all these things. I can accomplish what I oftentimes call impossibilasana, the impossible pose. That we look at that, oftentimes those of us on the stiffer end of the spectrum, right? We come in somewhere on this continuum of either flexible, very flexible, or very stiff. And if you're far on the flexible end of the spectrum, there's a whole set of problems that go with that. So it's a mistake to just think that flexibility will solve all your problems. Flexibility is just sort of this inherent thing that is in the body. We come in with a certain degree of flexibility. And as we go through life and hormones change throughout life, you know, like I remember as a young boy being pretty flexible up until about age 12. Well, what happens? Your voice changes, everything changes, you get really uncomfortable for a while, and that's when I noticed everything starts to tighten up. And so there are these hormonal changes that go through our life, and that will impact our flexibility, and maybe even to some degree our mobility. So flexibility is this inherent thing that comes through the body and the muscles. Mobility is in and around the joints. So we're going to target the bones and we're going to target the joints. Because we can have a stiff constitution, but we can be mobile in our joints. You can have a really flexible constitution, and with the flexible constitution, there's actually too much space in the joints. There's too much space. Imagine that. Your bones are designed to fit together perfectly. And if there's too much space, those are the areas that don't get enough compression, and those are oftentimes the parts that get arthritis first. Isn't that interesting? And one of the most challenging things I have as a teacher is helping those who are on the loose end of the spectrum, because they need the pressure in the bones more than anything, and they have to use their muscles to get there. And for a flexible person to use their muscles to put the pressure into the bones, it's as annoying as a stiff person trying to gain mobility. They just don't like it. All right? So the whole idea with this yoga is that we are all moving toward what I call an athletic constitution. You know, we're just balanced. The bones are carrying their share of the load in some sort of idyllic relationship to the muscles. Like a tent. You know, you've all gone camping and you set up a tent. You put the stakes in the ground, you run the lines play their role, the poles have a role, the fabric has a role, and when you step back and it's all dialed in just right, it's well balanced, right? And so that's what we're trying to accomplish with this yoga. Balance within the bones, balance within the joints, and balance with all the surrounding tissues. Okay, we're going to start doing some yoga here in a second, but I want to make another point. This is from Dr. Fishman as well, and in one of his talks, he says, he holds up a water bottle just like this, and he says, if this is your bone, well, I'm going to ask you guys this. How many of you know what part of the bone do they scan for the DEXA scan test?
What part of the body?
Yeah. The scan picks up the outer layer. That's all it does. Imagine if this wasn't here and you would just see the thin lining of the water bottle. That's what the DEXA scan picks up, is how dense is the outer shell of your bones. 30 to 70% of your bone strength comes from the middle. So it's another little piece of information that you can just say to yourself, okay, I'll do my yoga, I'm not going to worry. And I'll speak just for a second about the medications, and I've learned about the medications over the years from various people that struggle with whether or not they should take them. It's a big decision. From what I know is that, like any medication, they come with a certain degree of risk. But the medication is, I just got ahead of myself here a little bit. You're all going to get a link to the physiology talk. Let me do a little quick thing about physiology. You have one group of cells called osteoblasts that produce bone. You have another group of cells called osteoclasts that remove bone that's no longer necessary. What stimulates that physiology? Pressure, gravity. If an astronaut goes into space, they have to go through a very special reentry program to get their bone mass back. So the yoga, and this is what Dr. Fishman's studies all prove, the yoga multiplies the impact of gravity by a huge number. He says 10 times. He says your muscles are 10 times stronger than gravity. See, he even gives this example. Here's my muscle defying gravity. Okay, piece of cake. It's my muscle defying gravity. But here's my muscle, making a strong fist, adding pressure to all these bones times 10. So we're going beyond the impact of gravitational forces in our yoga. And we're getting what he calls cross-communication between the muscle and the bone. They communicate to each other, and they stimulate the bone growth and the bone density from a multitude of directions, not just up and down, not just jumping on a rebounder. And that's a beautiful thing. And I can tell you that I've seen it in students that stay with consistent practice. We do leg work, and I have my hands on their heels and stuff, and I can feel over a period of time how someone's body starts to reorganize. That's the word I use. We find our peaceful sense of self in the practice, and everything reorganizes around that peaceful center. And I can feel it. I can feel when somebody's bones are being contacted, and maybe it's my imagination, but I can feel it changing as I come around and I put my hands on people's bodies. So, back to the analogy here. This is one of those wrappers that go around some wine bottles and tequila bottles. Where did we get this, Lori? Have these. So it's like a mesh. It's like expanded steel. They do this. And all these different lines have supportive forces going through them. Now imagine this multidimensional. So you've got them going all different kinds of ways in a 3D form. This is the trabecula. This is the inside part of your bone. You got this hard outer shell, kind of like an egg, and then inside, and if you can search this term on the internet, look at an X-ray, and you can see these lines of transmission. And that's another term that I use a lot in the yoga. So, like the neck of the femur might be at an angle like this, but then as it goes down the leg, it all turns. And so now, those lines of transmission organize the integrity and the structure all the way down through the knee, the lower leg, into the foot. It's everywhere throughout the body. I don't know about you, but these kind of visualizations really help me understand my practice. It helps me get clear on what it is that I'm targeting. Is this helpful? Do you have any questions, comments?
You were talking about the osteoblasts and the osteoclasts.
Osteoblasts, say more about them?
Did you want to say anything about that? I want.
There's more that I could say about them, but I want to get started here pretty soon.
Yeah.
And you're all going to get a physiology talk that explains it in great detail with graphs and images and things like that. Okay. So, real quickly here, it's pretty cool that we have some scientific evidence, some scientific proof that this works. It's called Wolff's Law. What I just described to you, how the lines of transmission follow down through the trabeculae, they follow those lines. It was a guy named Wolff. He was a German anatomist, Julius Wolff, in the 1800s, discovered this. And here's what he said. Bone in a healthy animal or person will adapt to the loads under which it is placed. If loading on a particular bone increases, the bone will remodel itself over time to become stronger to resist that sort of loading. The internal architecture of the trabeculae undergoes adaptive changes followed by secondary changes to the external cortical portion of the bone, perhaps becoming thicker as a result. There it is. Thank you, Julius Wolff. All right? Okay, and the last point I want to make here is just a little bit about the duration. Dr. Fishman stated another study. It sounds like he even knew the guy who did this study, but apparently he isolated some bone cells, put them in a petri dish, and somehow stimulated them, and watched how much time needs to go by before this little muscle or this little bone cell extrudes bone. 12 seconds. 12 seconds of stimulation was enough to produce the bone. So if you're in a real hurry, you could do all these poses. What's 12 seconds times 12 poses? 144 seconds, right? So, but then he says, that's the minimum amount of time. And then he said, it starts to lose its ability to produce bone around 72 seconds. So somewhere in there, we could just say a minute. 30 to 60 seconds is probably enough, practiced peacefully on a regular basis, to maintain bone health. That's pretty cool. That's for bone health and bone density. I don't think there's been any studies on how long it takes to create mobility in a joint. I think it takes a little more time than that. So we target anywhere from a minute to 2 minutes in some of these shapes. And if ever it gets to be too demanding, like if you're in a shape and you start to shake and your muscles are firing away, is that a bad thing? No. We welcome that. We welcome all the feedback. Pain, we don't want. If you're in outright pain, something is just too frustrating or too difficult or too painful, it won't be healthy because you won't be at peace with it. And then you'll struggle and you won't get the benefits. So we want every shape to be doable, and that's what we're going to talk about today. The term I use is called healing sensation. And healing sensation can be strong. It can be intense, but it won't take your peace away. Okay? And so at any point you have a question about that, just speak up. Don't even have to raise your hand. Yeah, so I hope this workshop is an introduction to Avita Yoga. If you're new to the practice, I hope you glean the principles of Avita Yoga and how we can target the bones, make them stronger, and simultaneously increase the health and mobility of the joints. That's what it's all about. Your body loves the pressure, and so we give it to it just in the right doses. And if you're inspired by this workshop and the information, join me online. You can jump into one of 5 series. I recommend series number 5. Start there. You can practice with me 3 to 4 times a week, and together we can build bone density and joint health. Thank you so much. See you there. Namaste.